Hello, and welcome to episode 6, the tree episode from Bosavern Farm. I'm Carl Group, your host for episode 6. And we're really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking about a lot of things and everything tree related. So we got 3 wonderful guests that are here to help us understand what's going on with the trees in West Penwith, what's the future looking like, maybe some of the past, what's happened, and everything and anything in between. So we have with us today Annie Surtees, Annie Surtees, Forest for Cornwall Program Manager. We have Terry Sutcliffe, leader of the Bosavern Tree Group, and Nick Taylor, volunteer of the brand new proposed Bosavern Nature Trail. And Nick is also an ecologist and has worked for Duchy College, National Trust, Penwith Landscape Partnership, and Cornwall Wildlife Trust. Welcome to you all today this morning.
Thank you.
First off, before we begin any of our episodes, we like to ask, what is your favorite vegetable and how do you like to prepare it? So Annie, would you like to start?
Okay, I'm not sure about my favourite, lots of favourite vegetables. I think my inheritance vegetable is a runner bean. And it's one I kind of have images of picking them on my grand's allotment and stringing them, sitting in the kitchen stringing them. And having had allotments ever since, that ritual is really strong with me. So actually, there's a boring way to do them, but I think the best way for me is actually with tomatoes and spicy curry for runner beans. They're great.
Terry.
Yeah, I think my inheritance is coming from Yorkshire. I like the humble potato and, nice mash with butter, salt, a bit of milk, nice onion gravy to go with it, and then you can add whatever you want.
Thank you. And Nick?
So I'm going to say roast anything. I think all vegetables are amazing if you stick some olive oil on them and bung them in the oven. I can't believe that even things I used to hate as a kid, like beetroot, taste amazing when they're roasted. So roast everything.
So we got roast everything, we've got potatoes, and we got a runner bean. That's the menu of this program. Terrific. All right, well, let's dive into then the trees. This is a huge topic for me when I was trying to think about it. So, and how we approach this. And I thought there's a global aspect to this, there's a national aspect to this, there's a regional, and then there's the absolute local. So I don't know if we're going to cover all of those or a bit of everything as this conversation grows. But maybe to start, what is a tree? How do you define a tree? Because I was thinking about gauze. Gauze? Do you say that? Is it gauze bushes? Gauze bushes? Are they considered a tree?
Well, no, they're more of a shrub, and I suppose it's partly down to size.
Okay.
And to how branched the stem is and how tall it gets. So like a gorse, it's many branched and doesn't grow very high. And then you get an oak tree, which has a very definite trunk and branches coming out and grows, doesn't grow very high around here, but, potentially grows high.
But it's interesting to think what the function of those is, isn't it? Because actually a gorse may, in this landscape, actually be really important as part of a hedgerow. It's not actually necessarily a tree, but it's part of a contribution to the landscape, but also part of the structure of the vegetation in this area. So it's quite an interesting one to think about. Do we define them in terms of actually how they look, or is there an element of how they function in the landscape and what they do for wildlife and everything else?
Well, and from a botanical point of view, if you're looking in a field guide, what Terry says is quite right, that they would normally define it by height and by being single stemmed. But of course, here in West Cornwall, a lot of the trees are much shorter because of the exposure. And then you've also got the factor that sometimes trees have had some form of management which has led to them being multi-stemmed. So if you have a hazel, for example, and cut that down, that will regrow with multiple shoots and would fall into the category of a bush at that point. So it's a sliding scale. It's a broad spectrum, I think.
And following on from that, is there a difference? I mean, I know this sounds really elementary, but bush versus forest.
So bush is a word that we wouldn't use. Bush would be a description of a small shrub, I suppose.
Okay.
I think one thing that we put into the definition is having woody vegetation, that a tree would need to have woody vegetation. However, some other plants would fall into that category, like bramble can be quite woody, or ivy, and those probably wouldn't be seen as trees. But forest, well, I'm going to leave that one to Annie. As the
Okay,
forest.
so forest, again, that can be a huge number of things. We usually associate it with a huge accumulation of trees, vast numbers of trees. So you might think of tropical rainforests, you might think of a temperate rainforests, which we might think of temperate coniferous forests, which are so important in terms of our landscape and quite often forgotten. So actually forests can be many things for different people, but it's a term. So we've got Forest for Cornwall, which actually is not about making a forest of Cornwall of trees everywhere. That's not practical, but it's about actually everybody's individual trees that actually contribute to the trees and woodlands across this area.
Okay.
So forest can be very much about how you interpret it. It doesn't necessarily be to be Red Riding Hood scary forest.
Yeah.
It can be very many different other things as well.
I think that's where I was thinking, because as being Canadian, forest for us is like, you can get lost in a forest and never come out. Well, I don't think you can do that here.
I think there's a definition which follows the sort of designation of some land put aside for hunting purposes. So, for example, the New Forest
Right.
would have areas of what we would see as woodland forest, but they're also open areas of more scrub and heathland. But I think that was another sense of how the word forest was used.
And then following on from that, what happened to all the trees in West Penwith? Historically, where did they go?
There's various points of view on this one. So one thing is that the mining industry had a major impact. However, pre-mining, it's thought that there was woodland, much more woodland here, but there was a really particularly rich source of stone for stone axes, which led to a lot of clearance. So the Newlyn Quarry area has Blue Elvin, which led to there being a particularly rich source of axes, which led to forest clearances. But we are in a very exposed, this far west. The soils are thin, the winds are strong and salty, and so it doesn't lend itself to productive tree growing, as Terry well knows.
Terry, if you can come in. So for growing trees and trying to bring things back to a point where, you have, I guess, a forest of sorts, or a woodland of sorts, is that proving to be very difficult?
Well, I mean, time will tell. Our community woodland, which was planted about 10 years ago, it's doing okay. But some of the trees, especially the oak, are very stunted. We don't know exactly why, but some of the others, like alder, seems to grow quite well and is quite tall now.
Okay.
So it depends on the tree.
And for this area in particular, obviously the physical elements of the geography and the weather mean that actually tree growing is difficult, but also we very much have to respect the other things that are going on from an ecological point of view, from a historic point of view, from an archaeological landscape perspective. So
Plus, this area is so diverse, isn't it? You got the strong winds coming off the Atlantic, and so you got coastal stuff. Yeah. Then you got valleys. Then you got agricultural areas that are protected or not protected. You got urban environments. You got just outside of urban. I mean, I guess that's everywhere, but I guess, is it really the winds and the salt water that's our challenge here, and the thin soil layer? Is that the
all
three
of those
components?
things? I would agree with you there. Yeah.
Is there something I'm missing in that?
I think it's just generally challenging.
Tree
if you're a
diet?
tree to
Yeah.
grow.
Yeah, it's acidic.
Yeah, it's the wind and the salt. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, because I mean, we just had that storm a couple of weeks ago, and I mean, people in Penzance were talking about salt on their windshields.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just like, what? All the way down there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So actually, there's a whole myriad of factors that we have to take into account whenever actually we want to plant a tree.
Nick, if I don't know, as I said, this question, if you can answer this or not, coming from the National Trust point of view. So along the coastal path and all that, where it's very barren, is there ever been an attempt, or is there an attempt, or would they want to plant trees or start that? along that? Because that's really...
So this is a really complex question that I can't speak necessarily on behalf of the National Trust. I can speak from various organisations' points of view. So, for example, the Cornwall Wildlife Trust would give advice as to which species might be appropriate for planting. So they would say native species are appropriate for planting in that area. However, there are many different factors which kind of overlay when you're wanting to plant. So you've got the landscape, as Annie said, the archaeological history. Something I'm very conscious of is people's emotional reaction to woodland. So we live in a very tree-free environment down here in Penwith, and I know from my own personal experience, I like being in trees. I seek out areas of woodland, and I would like there to be more woodland, but perhaps that's not necessarily appropriate in this landscape. Perhaps an open landscape is appropriate, and actually this open landscape has now been recently protected. There's a SSSI designation over a good part of the open Penwith moors, which would limit tree growth. People would be sort of in contravention of the SSSI designation if it was too wooded. So it's a really interesting conversation, and one that I think we all need to have is, what do we want the landscape to look like in the future? Would we like Penwith to be wooded? Would we like to feel like we are in the middle of a forest? And I think that's a really interesting, we have to factor in food production. We have to factor in biodiversity. Trees are great for climate change. I'm sure we're going to be touching on all of these kind of things in further on in the podcast, but it's a very complex question.
Mm-hmm. So I understand the reasons and the positives of it. What's surprising to me is to try to understand, maybe you can add to the conversation, what's the resistance? Why would people oppose this? That's new to me. Like, to think that there would be people that would think, no, I don't want a woodland. I don't want a forest here, or a woodland. Let's keep it at that.
So it is interesting. From a landscape perspective, obviously this is a very a landscape without many trees. It's that traditional small fields landscape in terms of the coastal belt. Not many trees, particularly in this area on the West Penwith, and that's part of the heritage of this area as well. So actually, significant amount of tree planting could potentially reduce those views, actually change that view of this area. So it is about actually what's okay to do that actually potentially changes the landscape.
And it's very important as well to take into consideration what is already there. So a kind of classic example is an area called Chinal Moor, not too far away from here, which is a small area of protected land. It's a SSSI for the rare plant species that
May
used
I
to be
interrupt?
found there.
Just sorry for it.
Yeah,
SSSI means
Site of Special Scientific Interest. It's a national designation for protected species or habitats or geology. Chinal Moor has been receiving no management for the last 40, 50, 60 years and is now woodland. It's scrub woodland, willow scrub woodland. From the botanical point of view, it's much lower in value because the rare species possibly have been lost because there's a blanket of willow over these rare plants now. So there is a question of what is there now, is that of value? And this was why I think the West Penwith Moors SSSI was put into place, because the heathland is of value of its own right. So if you plant onto heathland, you could, in theory, be reducing the value of the heathland species.
Which is where we come back to right tree, right place. That actually, if it's ecologically valued for something else, we've got some fantastic grasslands, as Nick was saying. Planting trees on those actually is to the detriment of those other species. So it's actually trying to achieve that balance from ecological point of view. If we plant on a former archaeological site, then actually we potentially could destroy that site. If we plant in areas with of significant landscape quality or value, then actually we can change that. So it's also about having that perspective about what does our landscape look like, what do we want our spaces to look like in the future.
It's much more complicated than I ever imagined.
Well, one thing
Is it
also
as
occurs.
complicated as I'm thinking?
Absolutely.
You can't underestimate the
Yeah,
complication.
and I think we talk about planting a tree, and I think we need to kind of almost change the narrative to say growing a tree, because actually it's like you can put a tree in the ground. What does it look like? What's its value in the future? So, and it could offer lots of potential value, but it could also be detrimental if it's the wrong tree in the wrong place.
I was going to just highlight the sort of amenity, recreation value of having woodland. So here on Bosavern, one of my very favourite places is if you walk up into the area where Terry has been doing all that fantastic work. There's a belt of Italian alders, which are not a native species, but are doing fantastically well. You go through the Italian alders and there's this lovely little sheltered glade that is just the loveliest place to be. And it's just that feeling of being amongst trees. And the trees up there are doing really well, aren't they, in that sheltered area?
Yes, we like to call it the secret glade, because not many people know that it's there.
Perhaps we shouldn't tell anybody. The secret is out, Terry, I'm sorry.
Oh, yes. Yes, got a lovely viewpoint up there and nice place for a picnic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you did your moth trapping.
I did. It was a lovely evening. We had a magical evening. I mean, we're slightly going off on a tangent here, but it was it was really wonderful to take people through the farm. And I want to talk about the nature trail a little bit later. But along the trail and then into the glade, where there was a beautiful sheltered area. I set up a moth trap, and we had 2 beautiful evenings where all these magical little creatures of the night came down to the lamp, and it was wonderful. So having trees creates shelter and areas where other types of wildlife thrives, and in the very open landscape that is most of Penwith and predominantly found on Bosavern, this open landscape, you do find these little pockets that are just wonderful.
Yeah.
So if you have, sorry.
So definitely, it's like it might be more complicated than you first anticipated in terms of getting the trees. But what we're really wanting to do is where is the right places to get trees in, and how can we increase it because of all those additional benefits that trees bring in terms of capturing carbon, but in terms of biodiversity, in terms of flooding, in terms of soil improvement. So there's a host of advantages of having them. And as Nick said, that experiential thing about trees is just the most magical. Whether you live in West Penwith or whether you're in towns or cities, then actually that human emotive reaction to trees is actually really, really important. So how can we get more trees into the landscape in the right place is very much definitely where we're trying to head to.
But that for me brings up the idea of scale. So if you have, let's say, an acre and you're able to open up on 5 acres. So you're able to set up a woodland in 5 acres. Are you able to achieve a lot of what you've said about the soil and the biodiversity and those items, those things? Are you able to achieve that on the 5 acres, but once it hits outside of that boundary and now everything is clear, is it still workable in that 5 acres? Or do you need a much larger patch?
Do you mean in terms of the tree growth or the
tree growth?
You can have incremental gains. So actually, tree planting in a small corner of a field actually may be somewhere that you couldn't, from an agricultural point of view, maybe you couldn't get your tractor, maybe it's too wet, maybe it's too steep. So actually, there could be incremental gains. So particularly in a landscape like this, so actually planting in that sheltered corner where actually if you're integrating trees within the farming practices, may actually be a real benefit. Thickening up hedges, so actually it doesn't impact significantly on that farm area overall in terms of grazing, may be really advantageous in terms of the trees, but it's also really advantageous in terms of the livestock. So you've got additional shelter from rain, wind, cold, but also shade in the summer where we're having increased episodes of high temperatures. We've got benefits in terms of soil erosion, benefits in terms of reduced flooding, potential water quality improvements as well. So you can have a myriad of effects. So you could actually, if you've got the potential to plant large areas, we certainly want to plant large areas because we can actually increase the gains effectively. But actually, if not, then there are small incremental gains that we can look at, which actually cumulatively in Cornwall are really, really important.
Right.
And when you look at sort of, Canadian forests or wherever, they're vast.
Yeah.
And that real forests, ours are actually really quite small on the scale of things.
That's where I think, my mind's in that scale, and I'm trying to look at, okay, how much smaller scale and how beneficial it is and what it actually does or achieves.
Absolutely. So it might be a tree in somebody's front garden, which actually offers lots of benefits to them on a personal level because it actually looks great and it feels nice. And actually, there's also that whole emotive issue, actually. It's really nice planting trees. When we actually feel that climate change and all the things are fairly overwhelming and maybe the things that we actually can't control or we can't contribute to, then actually, in a small way, tree planting is something that we can feel positive about. So that might be, as I say, your individual tree in your garden. It might be the trees that will be part of the nature trail that they're going to have in Bosavern. It's that experience of trees in the community garden, but also on a wider scale, all those other advantages we've talked about on bigger scale.
I think coming back to that question about mindfulness and spirituality and emotional contribution, Terry, your project, do you see that happening with your group?
Yes, for sure. I joined the group at the most recent form of the group, the Bosavern Tree Group, formed just at the start of lockdown. And it was just coincidence that they were saying, okay, you've got to distance yourself socially 2 meters. And we were planting trees at 2 meters. So it was a great way of socializing right the way through the isolation that was created by lockdown and doing something that was really grounding and left you feeling good.
Right.
Created some joy. And, we've actually, many of the group, we've kind of got long-term friendships from that early start. Yeah.
How are the lockdown trees doing?
The lockdown trees are doing absolutely fine. They're some of them are. Well, it started off as like 1 foot high, and now the height of me, so higher.
Great.
5-6 foot, and it's great. It's really uplifting to walk around the farm and see where the early plantings went in, and see how it's developing. And you think, oh my goodness, this is looking like a hedge, a proper hedge.
Right. What were you dropping in? Saplings?
These are saplings, and mostly we were buying them in through funding, various funding, including Forest for Cornwall. These are, they're only about, 40, 60 centimetres high. The roots are only about, 6 inches, whatever that is. So they don't take a lot of actually digging into the ground. You don't have to, we don't have to create a massive hole. So they're fairly easy to plant.
Right. Do you come by, Annie, and sort of check on things, and does it have to meet a certain standard or anything, or the seed saplings are given? Saplings, right? And just take them and plant them?
Well, we have grants giving, so what we do is work with anybody who wants to grow trees. So Bosavern Farm, for instance. So we look at developing, helping support those programs, and people quite often come with very fixed ideas of what they want to do, or sometimes it's like, I'd like to plant some trees on my land, what's appropriate? So we help them develop the designs. We then actually look at, is it the right tree in the right place, and how this works.
And this happens on a residential level as much as a commercial level?
It happens in terms of local community groups, but it would be somebody with any landholders who has some land who wants to plant trees. So
what would be a minimum amount of size?
We can actually support very, very small plantings.
Okay.
So we have a number of programs. So we have one which we call our sort of planting scale, which is larger programs of trees.
Okay.
But we also have for individual projects. We also have kind of household trees. But things like at Bosavern Farm, we'll actually help projects develop the funding. We actually then give the funding or give access to other funding that's appropriate for that tree planting. And then project holder then plants it, delivers it, and we will then ask for photographic evidence, and we do some checks in terms of that it has been planted.
Right.
And also, very importantly, there's a maintenance grant associated with it. So the first couple of years of the tree planting is actually really essential. So we give a maintenance grant to actually also make sure that people do get them watered, they are mulched, so protect the trees.
So if someone has a half-acre parcel or an acre parcel, let's say, and they wanted to commit that to that program,
Yeah,
they could contact you and
they contact Forest for Cornwall, and we will look at what the site is. Project officer will
Wow.
get in touch with them and be able to advise them and support them in various different ways. So the Forest for Cornwall set up in 2019. Gosh, right century here.
2019.
Yeah.
Okay.
2019. So just before lockdown. So obviously that had a bit of a hampering on things. But actually, across all partners, there's been 1 million trees planted, which is about 1,000 hectares. So it's a fantastic achievement. And that's not just about us, that's about all the different partners. So that might be National Trust, or it might be the Duchy.
This is all run through Forest for Cornwall.
Well, it's all partnership of Forest for Cornwall. So actually it's a partnership. So we have a grant-giving element of it, and we can help and support and give grants to groups or landholders.
Yeah.
And then we work with our partners who also have their own other ways of securing tree growing. But just coming back to that sort of point about seeds, one of the things that we're really keen of is local provenance. So they talk about native species. So what's native to the UK, but what's local to Cornwall, and what's even local to West Penwith.
Right.
So actually that's really, really important. And actually trees that may be brought in from, a lot of the big commercial nurseries are in the Midlands. Well, actually, bringing trees that are grown in those conditions down to Cornwall may actually not be suitable. So survival rates are really not good. So actually we've been really keen to support local growing of trees. So I know Terry's growing local trees here for, this is unique in West Penwith, but also trying to support those local commercial nurseries with tree growing, but also community nurseries. So they actually collect local seed to grow on, which will produce a product for Forest for Cornwall, for all the projects we support, and hopefully for projects into the future. So actually getting that local provenance is really, really important. And it comes down to really, really close geography. So elm is kind of quite a disputed provenance. Well, actually, there's some very, very local elms. So actually, it's obviously impacted by Dutch elm disease and various other things. But yeah, it is very localized in terms of what we grow and how we grow it. So trying to encourage that local provenance is really important.
Terry, did you want to? Was that where you're headed, or
one thing that is new for the tree planting group is that we've got a very small community tree nursery started. So in the autumn we are collecting seeds and berries and nuts and germinating them, which is a whole process in its own right over the winter. And planting them in these special containers, these root trainers that we have that are really special for tree growth. We also need volunteers that will help develop the tree nursery side of things.
Right.
And again, this is something which Forest for Cornwall is providing some funds for. Yeah.
So Terry, then, is there anything native out of that in the seeds that you're procuring or using or growing that you see?
Yeah. Well, as I said earlier, particularly pleased to be able to be collecting rowan berries and hawthorn and gorse seeds from the farm itself.
Yeah.
It's great.
Okay. And Annie, is there a sort of checklist of native trees that you see for this area?
Yeah, I mean, we'd certainly look at hawthorn, blackthorn, elder, rowan, hazel. Oak is actually in very small numbers in this area, isn't it? So actually, you do get small amount of oak, but it's not particularly strong in this area. Gorse, I think, is quite key and quite local. I'm not quite sure of what Nick's thoughts would be on that one.
So it's a really interesting question, this question of what is native. So are we talking native to the UK? Are we talking native to West Penwith? Because quite often what you see is planting going on, which planting of trees which you might find further up country. So for example, along the side of the A30, there's lots of field maple. You don't see field maple in the wider countryside. So I think what Terry's doing in collecting seeds and then propagating trees locally is probably the best way that you can ensure that your trees are of local provenance. However, there's another voice nagging away in the background which says to me that do we always want to be planting native trees? Because it may well be that, for example, the Italian alders, which aren't native, have acted as very, very effective nursery trees. So we might be wanting to plant trees to provide shelter in order for other species to thrive. And then at some point in the future, those trees might be managed, they might be taken out for firewood or whatever. So it's a very complex question. People need trees to do many jobs. And so being purist about it, as a conservationist, I tend to think in that pure way, but I am aware that trees are sometimes useful in other ways. Nectar sources, for example. Some trees, some plants in your garden are fantastic as nectar sources, whether they're native or not. So it's a very complex question.
And absolutely. And what's native and what's naturalised. So sycamore, and particularly in this area, is a naturalised species. So it's not native to the UK, but has been brought in, and it is widely distributed. But it's actually really tolerant to wind and salt water. So actually, it's probably one of the most significant, very small trees very often on the coastal areas, but it actually does very well. And when we're looking at the loss of things like ash and elm in our landscape, then actually sycamore is actually really quite a significant one that's come in to replace it. And actually, going back to that natural regeneration, it does regenerate very quickly and very rapidly. Now, that might be seen as a problem in some cases, but actually it's very important. So as Nick says, it's a very thorny issue that we're trialing to deal with in a changing climate that we're not quite sure what actually is going to work best. So I think we have to kind of be quite open in terms of our expectations, but and it's going back to kind of what's right for that particular location in that position and for that purpose.
Are the sycamore? This is going to be really bad. Are the sycamore trees the ones that I call the old growth trees? They're about 10 meters high, and you can see them occasionally around homes, and they've got cones. What are those?
Oh no, those are Monterey pines.
Monterey pine.
So those are definitely landscape-wise, they're quite significant. They were planted because they are very wind tolerant and saltwater tolerant, so they're predominantly here. They're certainly not one we would advocate planting in a general landscape that don't have great biodiversity value. So they're probably one that you wouldn't want to say plant.
Is that because are they acidic, the needles? So when they hit the ground, nothing.
You wouldn't want to. It's not that the impact on the soil. It's just that they don't support a large range of species in their own right. So, for example, oaks are often quoted as having this huge range of invertebrates that associate with them.
It's got a big ecosystem attached to it.
Yes, but sycamores, I know that the lichenologists love sycamores because their smooth bark provides a very nice environment for lichens. You get lots of aphids on sycamores, and blue tits aren't discriminating against the different species. They just want lots and lots of aphids. So you get lots of bird populations using sycamores. Monterey pines, not so much. I mean, I'm trying to think of uses. I know of buzzards nesting in Monterey pine, so maybe there's an argument there. But I would rather see a broadleaf tree planted than
and I think another one, perhaps a holm oak. which
Yeah.
quite often another one.
Yeah.
They do well. It's the evergreen oak, often
Right.
associated with churchyards.
Uh-huh.
They can be quite invasive. So they can sort of take over. But again, they are tolerant of conditions in this area, but they don't support that wider biodiversity ecosystems.
See, when I see some of these, I'm thinking this is what once used to cover this area, but it's not. Because obviously the age of these, that's why I call them old growth, even though they're not really old growth.
It would be low canopy height. You would have lots of perhaps hazel, blackthorn,
All right. Okay.
willow, oak. There's not a huge range of species that would be truly native, but I think we're at the point where we can't afford to be completely purist about this now.
Yeah.
I mean, beech is a really interesting question because beech was one of the last species to make it across the channel before the channel formed. And so beech is traditionally thought of as being native to the southeast of England. And when it's planted here, people say, beech isn't really native to the southwest. But I've heard the discussion that actually beech is a slow-moving tree, and it would have got here if we hadn't got everything so pinned down. If the countryside wasn't so managed, beech would have probably got to Cornwall by now. And so,
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, I was in the south of France this year, and in rural France, there's large areas of oak woodland, and this is sessile oak, common oak. I was thinking that this is one that would be well worth planting because it is climate tolerant. It will tolerate. It does thrive in a Mediterranean climate as well as an English climate. So a good one to plant.
So, Annie, is that always on your radar, sort of like a tree inventory? What's new? What's in fashion? Like, not in fashion, but I mean...
Fashion is probably the difficult one, and that's that a lot of Victorian fashion or whatever is, or 1980s fashion will have monkey puzzle trees everywhere. So it is about what grows well
Yeah.
in a certain environment, but actually thinking, well, as Terry was saying, actually if we're getting hotter, drier summers, what can actually tolerate those? What species will be able to use wetter winters? Can they survive the drier summers and wetter winters, which is actually kind of counterintuitive to a certain extent. So, we are looking at a landscape of trees that's what's happening in other places. Is that appropriate for where we want to plant? And also, what do we want to get out of it? Because actually, is there a productive element of those species that we want to use as well?
Has climate change had an effect that what may have been native to here at one point, now you're seeing doesn't grow as well as it used to because of whether it's temperature rise or, increased rain or something like that?
I think not yet, but I think it's coming. I have heard talk about the ecosystems changing and perhaps even us planning ahead by planting Mediterranean species, we're starting now to get into really quite controversial territory of planning for a landscape change that we don't know how it's going to happen. But certainly we're experiencing drier summers, wetter winters, and the ecosystems are going to have to cope with that change.
Do you think by doing that, by adjusting to those sorts of species, that you're actually you're moving, how do I word this, that you're moving with the progress of climate change instead of bringing something that may be able to combat it by going back to the native species?
I think both things are true. Trees are fantastic carbon sinks. They'll take carbon out of the atmosphere while they're growing and then become a carbon store.
Right.
Woodland stores carbon, mature woodland stores carbon, but also other habitats do as well. So, for example, wetlands, if you've got peatlands, that accumulates vegetation and locks up carbon. So what you don't want to do is to plant into a damp area of mire and dry it out. And so, it's a very, very complex question.
Yeah.
Where we plant. And I'd like to bring in another woodland creation technique, which is not planting is allowing natural regeneration to take place, because trees are able to set seed and grow themselves. It's what they've always done. Here we are in a situation where there are very few sources of seed, but I've worked in a woodland where we had a block of land that we were planting and a block of area that we didn't plant at all, and we allowed the scrub to regenerate, and then trees seeded themselves, or perhaps jays and squirrels brought seeds in, and we had a lovely woodland creating itself. So if you do allocate enough time, woodland in many situations will occur naturally. I think at Bosavern and in this Penwith landscape, it probably needs a helping hand, because there are so few trees around to act as a source, a seed source. But I'm, as an ecologist, very pro scrub. Those marginal habitats are of immense value. When I was teaching, I used to teach woodland management, grassland management, and in both of those modules, scrub was a bad thing that we needed to clear away. And now I'm much more of the opinion that it's a continuum, and that the areas that we allow to scrub over, I think we have to be very careful, because scrub and bramble can be seen as messy and marginal land. And so one of the things I wanted to bring in with the nature trail was really clear signage and interpretation, and be able to demonstrate to people, this area is an area that we're managing for hay, this is a cropped field, but these corners that look scruffy, these are fantastic for wildlife. And if you look into the brambles, into the gorse, you'll see that young trees are developing. So allowing natural regeneration to take place, or planting into those areas where the brambles can act as protection, that's another factor as well, which Terry...
Yeah, and one of the motivations for the planting we're doing now is looking ahead, when our young community woodland is more mature, and already we're collecting seeds from the rowan and the gorse and the hawthorn, and replanting those to grow on. But in the future, the mature trees that we're planting will in themselves act as a seed provider for the areas around here.
I was just going to say, I'd really echo those points, that natural regeneration is a really, really important thing, and actually growing the things that are locally around. And there is actually some grant support for that, and that's quite often not recognised. So actually you can get some grant support for actually fencing that off and actually allowing natural regeneration to happen. The support maintenance support that's needed for that. So it is seen as a really important element of regenerating our woodlands. But sometimes it's actually, we find that people, because they want to plant trees, that they actually overlook that element of how important that is. And I know from experience of areas that I've lived before, where actually natural regeneration, you actually get, as Nick was saying, a much better survival rates. Obviously the trees are growing naturally, and actually a much better structure in that woodland, because it's grown at its own pace.
So Nick, what you're saying, just to be clear, is that while natural regeneration is really important, it works hand in hand with Annie's project, which is to bring in and that assistance that's needed.
I think we need both. I think one of the problems with natural regeneration, it does produce fantastic trees of local provenance, obviously, because the seed is coming in locally. But you need to have those trees in the first place, and you need to have time. And quite often we're thinking in human scales, and trees work over a much longer time scale. And also we do have this issue of thinking that scrub or waste ground is messy or unwanted, and that perception needs to change. And I do think that actually people understand tree planting more than they understand allowing that natural regeneration. And we did a fantastic project at Mount Space School where we planted some trees, and then we also identified some trees which had regenerated naturally, and we put tree guards around them. And once we'd put guards around them, the groundskeeper thought, oh, that's new woodland, and so he didn't mow that area of bramble because he could see that as tree planting. So I think there's a little bit of changing perceptions going on. Another thing that you asked about earlier was about scale, and so there's a need to understand trees in terms of longer time scales and also wider landscapes. And very often people are thinking about their area of land or their patch of ground.
Yeah.
And what's really important is to be thinking in landscape scale. What is growing over there? What's growing over there? Can we create corridors? Can we link areas? There are some fantastic mapping tools actually available online. There's a mapping tool called Lagas mapping, which was carried out by Exeter University in collaboration with Cornwall Council, and that enables you to look at what they call a opportunity map. They map opportunities, so you can say there's woodland over here, there's woodland over here. Wouldn't it be lovely to have a patch of woodland joining in between, or heathland here, heathland there? Let's connect. So there are ways that you can think of your patch of land in terms of how it fits into the landscape, and I think that's really useful.
Does that come back? I was just wondering on your end, if someone 500 meters away down the valley decides I want to grow this patch, but the neighbor up the hill is going to be seeing that. Is that some of the controversy that could come into the potential growing of that patch of land?
It doesn't usually come into the scale in terms of what your neighbour think. It's like, well, you've got that ability to plant the tree. It's more about those designations on a landscape scale that actually makes a difference. But just picking up on Nick's point, so Cornwall Council have just produced a local nature recovery strategy, which actually identifies opportunities for different habitats. So just as Nick was saying, we can start looking at it from a strategic point of view. Can we join up some of the planting that we've already done? So if there's good opportunities for woodland planting, for instance, then actually we can look at that more strategically. So we can start connecting up landscapes. We can start creating corridors, which are great in terms of biodiversity, in terms of connectivity, but also in terms of flooding and water management. So if you actually can look at some of our priority catchments that have identified where we've got issues of flooding, and we've got some real issues of flooding.
Right.
How can we start thinking about, can we connect up different areas of trees and woodlands to actually help reduce the flow? So there's a great project that we've been doing with Cornwall Wildlife Trust called Upstream Thinking, which is supported by South West Water, which has actually identified a number of interventions across a whole catchment. So actually some of those are really small tree planting, maybe 0.1 of a hectare, maybe a small hedgeland, but actually combined they can actually produce some really significant benefits. So as you're saying, we can actually start kind of going, how do we work strategically as well as react to individuals' requests for tree planting?
You've touched on just now the environmental aspects. So what are the challenges? Is there any sort of statistics that you could pull out that are shocking or very interesting, or that you're working with to help form a battle plan against what is coming or what is already here by using tree and tree planting?
Well, statistically, 67% of the land is agricultural at the moment. So that means the other, trying to do the maths, 30% odd is for other things.
33.
We need to feed ourselves. That's got to be, that's fundamental. But all of the other factors that you're talking about, they're flooding, clean air, pollinating insects, that is provided by having healthy ecosystems around us. And I think the answer lays in identifying the areas that are really good at the moment, protecting those, but enlarging and connecting them. And this is where Terry's work at Bosavern is really, you can really see clearly how we've got this fantastic network of Cornish hedges, which are packed with biodiversity. There's very often scrub along the top and then longer grasses around the side. Widening those connecting corridors by planting, creating a little woodland scrub belt which joins larger areas of woodland is the way to go, because that doesn't reduce significantly the cropping area, because we're kind of taking corners, we're just taking a little bit. It's just making sure that those boundaries, those edge features are made the most use of. In actual fact, having an effective shelter belt is a benefit to the crops. We did some research at when I was at Duchy College, and it was, although you have increased shade to a certain extent, the shelter outweighs the shade. So it is worth allowing your hedges to grow, to be larger, to be more productive for your, more protective of your crop. So hopefully that's something that will happen at Bosavern in the future, because I know that's.
Yeah, very much so. I see it as if you look at the field system, if we take an overview, then I can see a lattice work of hedging, which connects from the Cock Valley up through to the moorland above. That's very much, we have that in mind.
Is there a target number or percentage number or something you're actually aiming for?
Well, in terms of setting up Forest for Cornwall, and it was in response to climate emergency. So what they did, they looked at actually sequestering 1% of Cornwall's unavoidable carbon. And we're talking about 8,000 hectares of tree planting.
Okay.
Now, that's hugely ambitious. We've achieved about 1,000 hectares.
With 1 million trees.
With 1 million trees. So we're looking to 2030 in terms of achieving that. So that actually is probably a stretching target, but it's something that we can look at. How do we actually start? Is that possible? Is that achievable? But coming back to that point about how do we balance trees in terms of their ability to capture carbon, but also having a farming working landscape, and we need to feed ourselves, and there's huge discussions currently about how do we balance that. But the evidences really show it's becoming quite strong, as Nick and Terry were saying, that actually increasing numbers of trees within that farmed landscape has really many benefits, and that might be about biodiversity, it might be about pollination, but also they're seeing some benefits to livestock, actually having shelter in the winter, actually retaining weight. So actually you don't effectively need to feed them some additional farm, because they've actually been sheltered more effectively, so they're not using so much energy just to keep warm.
Right.
And there is also some foraging advantages. So livestock will self-medicate on various different species. They know what's actually good for them. So actually having that variety within your hedges, within those features, actually can have real direct benefits in terms of livestock, and also horticulturally as well. So yeah, huge advantages. So it is really trying to kind of get that balance going. How do we increase trees? How do we capture more carbon? But also actually how do we feed ourselves at the same time?
I'm getting this picture that the three of you are driving around and you're looking and you're seeing trees can go there. Trees can go there. Is there kind of immediately I think of golf courses. So golf courses, trees could grow on golf courses because they would be an obstruction in the fairway and create a challenge for the golfer. But a lot of golf courses out here are pretty much bare of any of that. So are there places that you're looking at and you're thinking, like, this is space that is potential, is it's wasted space. It could be used for tree growth.
I have to just say,
other than farms, as an example.
I've just had to say we had an application for tree going, which was approved this week, in fact, for a golf course here in Cornwall. So actually, we've funded a couple of projects where they put in hedges and trees.
For hedges?
Yeah, as part of their golf course. So just an aside, it's like, and that might be a perception thing, that actually that is changing to a certain extent, that actually it's becoming more of a mainstream, that actually there is advantages in planting trees, which is what we'd obviously hope. As you say, perhaps getting trees where we wouldn't have perceived that they would be very acceptable. So it's really encouraging to see. But I have to say, yeah, I do go around and go, yeah, could we put trees in there?
Well, other thoughts were roundabouts, perhaps, or, I don't know. I think golf courses, roundabout, other than just, because farms always are the number one on the tier, I think, right?
I think it's seeing trees in a slightly different way as well. It's not just seeing trees as sort of young, mature, upright trees. I think older, mature trees, fallen trees, very young trees in scrub. There's a whole range. So for me, nature, biodiversity is a continual range, which is fluid and is also quite messy, and it's changing perceptions of
Right.
a row of lollipop trees with mown grass underneath them, changing it to that could be a healthy functioning ecosystem. When branches fall, I understand the health and safety aspect, but those fallen branches are extremely useful for a whole range of invertebrates. So it's changing people's perception of what the landscape could look like. I nearly said should, and should is a difficult word to use. I think there is enormous potential. I think the government recognises this. In 2010, they commissioned Professor John Lawton wrote a report on why biodiversity was doing so badly, and it's because we see things in isolation. We see nature as belonging over there, and then this bit is the bit where we live, this is the bit where we produce our food. In actual fact, it should be all connected. So this is where quite a useful phrase came from that report, which was bigger, better, more joined up. And
Right.
so our places for nature should be bigger, which is easy to understand. Better, we need to debate that one a little bit, what's better for nature. But more joined up is easy to understand. That's connected. And actually, the government have enshrined this in law now in the Environment Act in 2021, I think. The government committed to working towards a single interconnected nature recovery network across the country by 2042. And the strategy that Cornwall Council is currently working upon is putting that into place. So that's Annie's.
Through the LNRS, yeah, that's right. And I think the other thing, we focus on tree planting, but actually carbon storage, carbon capture is actually within our woodlands. Mm-hmm. So actually well-maintained, managed woodlands actually store huge quantities of carbon. And actually what we see is going on in the trees, but actually sort of 2/3 of the carbon capture is actually happening underground. So actually in terms of soil carbon, in terms of the trees. So actually it's really important that we aren't thinking tree planting is one element of it, because we obviously want to increase our tree cover. But actually in terms of carbon capture, then actually maintaining and managing our existing woodlands is essential. And that's woodlands where we have woodlands within Cornwall, but obviously on a much more global scale, then actually protecting and managing those forests is actually essential in terms of our global perspective of climate change.
Right.
So it works. So what we can do now is about planting trees, but actually managing, protecting what we've already got is actually essential, because that's already got the carbon stored in it.
So bringing it back to Bosavern, Terry, your project is kind of almost like it's a living case study, isn't it? It's an ongoing case study. Am I correct?
Yes, it feels like we're constantly experimenting, really, and
Right.
seeing what the results are. Yes.
Do you think you're right on the curve, ahead of the curve? You're not behind the curve, but do you think you're on the curve or ahead of the curve of what's sort of unfolding politically, environmentally, policy-making wise, things like that?
Oh, on the curve, ahead of the curve. I'd like to think we're ahead of the curve. We're providing something that's really needed around here, nature recovery.
Right.
And we're doing it in a way which is really helpful for the people involved, to the volunteers.
So I would like to think that it can act as a kind of beacon for how things could be done. So I want to see that Bosavern functions primarily as an area that is producing food. It's a farm,
Yeah.
but also has these other aspects to it that sit harmoniously alongside it. And I think that the woodland areas, the tree planting that's going on, the educational aspects are all part of how we can produce food, how we can communicate about nature. My particular area of interest is the nature trail around the site, so taking people out into these areas so they don't come to Bosavern and see just the shop and the polytunnels and sort of over there's some fields with something going on. I'd like to take people out there and say, look, this is where there's food is being produced. This is an area that we're managing as a hay meadow. This is an area where we've planted trees. And also alongside the trail, as we wander around, these areas of scrub have been deliberately left. These brambles are particularly valuable for these insects. We've got badgers. There's a badger set over here. I would like to point out how these things are harmonious, how they work together, how the farm can act as a model for other food production.
Did that happen on one of the open days? I think harvest days or something like that. You took a group around.
I'm always wanting to do that. I have taken groups around. So. Yes, yeah,
yeah. So, can we say then that Bosavern can be a template for other communities to sort of, if other communities took on what Bosavern is doing here, which you've highlighted in detail, Nick, if you took that and put it into all communities, and this is an open question, what do you see as being the immediate benefits to each community by doing what's happening here?
I think that's an interesting question, but I think communities need to work together, and so you are going to have people from very different backgrounds trying to have similar objectives. And I think that Bosavern is one way of doing things. I think the thing that we need to do more effectively at Bosavern is integrate with the local community. So reach out to the St Just community, the farming community, the people in our parish, be open about what we're doing. And this is why this podcast is one of the things that I think is great. Having people having access to the site to see what's going on is all part of the process of gearing people up for dealing with this very changing environment that we find ourselves in.
So maybe come back to Terry on this. Terry, what motivates the folks that come in your group to do what they do?
Yeah.
And can that be parceled out, I guess, to attract what Nick's talking about, to bring in more community?
Yeah. I think there's a feel-good factor. The whole thing about, environmental change, climate emergency, it can give a deep sense of...
dread?
What's the word? Sorry?
Dread?
Yeah, dread, anxiety, and more destructive, I think, hopelessness, that there's nothing can be done. And yet, it's great that actually people find there's lots that can be done here. And it's not just the planting of the trees, it's the aftercare of the trees as well.
I mean, I think that people are absolutely feeling this eco-terror dread. But what I find really comforting is just getting out into nature and understanding it more. And so being in habitats where you have a range of species that you can see going about their normal life, it shows you that nature can recover. It does recover really quickly. It's fantastic. An area that is given over to nature, all sorts of interesting things start to happen. Even if it's just not mowing your lawn, species will start to use that. You'll bring in insects, you'll have all sorts of things going on. So I think there is a lot of emotional comfort to be taken from looking at the small scale whilst thinking a lot larger. So I'm thinking landscape scale a lot of the time, thinking how could this entire landscape be different? Where does what we're doing on a site like Bosavern fit into the landscape? How do we integrate? How do we influence our neighbours? How do we join up and work together? I mean, it's very difficult to bring people along with what you're doing if you're not communicating what you're up to. And so I think that's one of the key things that we have to do here is communicate clearly. We have to interact with organisations like the council, like the National Trust, like the Wildlife Trust, like the farming community, work alongside them and communicate what we're trying to do. That's the way forward.
And other than this sort of thing, podcasting or online sort of YouTube things or things like that, getting into the education system, I guess, and getting into the youth mindset and
we have schools. We have schools visit from as far away as London. Actually,
Really?
They
I
come
didn't know
down
that.
and they. This is a Latimer school, and they do a week of various activities around the area. And one of those activities is a day here at Bosavern Farm, and we have like 4 different areas that they get involved in. So the chickens, the vegetables,
that's fantastic.
and the trees, and they come and they help with the mulching and the weeding of the existing trees. And I'm always so impressed at how much they know about the environment and climate change. They're kind of on it, which I just find feels very hopeful for the future, that these young people are going to grow up with that sort of knowledge.
Right.
And on the farm here, we provide them with a living example of, how to grow trees, how to look after them, the importance of pollinators, go see the beehives. So it's a wonderful environment and fun. We have a lot of fun.
One of the other things, obviously, we support wider projects, but we do quite a lot of work within the urban areas within Cornwall. In some of those areas, less than 3% tree cover, very few trees at all. So we look at where we can get trees into the landscapes, and that might be people's front gardens. That might be about getting more trees into the highways. Going back to the right tree, right place, there may be a very different selection of trees. So whereas we plant the small whips here at Bosavern Farm, actually in terms of impact and in terms of presence, we'd actually look at planting larger trees within the urban area and perhaps different species, because and going back to that whole kind of about what trees do we plant in terms of climate change, we are looking at how do we make sure that some of those species are more resilient, so that actually it's starting to experiment a little bit more with what might work in those areas. But coming back to, that's on people's doorsteps. So actually the fact that actually those trees are there is really, really supportive to them in terms of health benefits. So there's real strong evidence now that actually even walking down a tree-lined street actually has a significantly positive impact on your well-being compared to walking down a street with no trees on it. So just that experience of having trees in your everyday life can actually be really, really valuable. And I think that's so special. And as the things that are going on here at Bosavern, it's about actually what's your connectivity, how do you engage with that? And actually, even on a subliminal level, you might not notice it, but actually they are having a benefit too.
Right. I guess that comes back to, Nick, what you were saying about sort of the stage of a tree and the size of it, and the timeline. So sort of looking at what you're saying, Annie, you can plant a tree, and then bringing in Terry on this as well. You plant a tree, and there's a certain joy or happiness to that moment of putting that into the earth. But then there's a timeline of waiting and watching to see what has become. So to the point where you get to that place where you're walking down that street, and you're experiencing that pleasure of a tree-lined street, or the psychology or the emotional benefits of that. Is there something in between there, between the sapling growing and then the full growth of that tree? Like there's a zone where you're not able to actually see that necessarily, because it's going to take some time to get there.
Well, you see it in small measures.
That's what my question is. What do you see?
The saplings grow probably about a foot a year.
Really, that much?
And some of them, like the older, they'll grow quicker than that. So you do see it.
Okay.
And if you haven't been round a field for a year and you go round again, you think, oh my goodness, it's different. Things have grown more.
Right.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think we could explore more is different methods or different ways of presenting our planting. So people tend to think of individual trees planted separately as being the way that trees are done. But there is some research that says that trees that are planted very, very close together do particularly well. And I forget the name of the...
Miyawaki forest.
There we are. That's the word I was rummaging for in my brain. I'm going to hand over to Annie. Thank you.
Sorry, what was that?
So, Miyawaki forest was developed by Japanese arborcologist, and they were looking very much at despoiled areas within the cities. So they developed a very intense way of planting. Trees are really close together, but there's a lot of work goes into the soil preparation.
Okay.
So actually quite significant. And when you look at the cost, you think, oh my goodness, there's huge cost in terms of actually putting that soil preparation together. So actually getting the soil conditions right, doing adding mycorrhiza significantly to help that tree growth, planting them in very dense blocks. But what they're actually finding now is that the long term, and they've done some research here in the UK, and we've done some projects in Cornwall, that actually the survival of those trees is really, really good, particularly even in drought periods. But also the initial cost is actually quite high. But in terms of survival rates, those costs are mitigated. So actually by actually investing early doors in that tree planting, actually you get a better quality tree going from there. So it's the experiments over here in the UK, they're sort of 2-3 years old. So we're just looking as to what the implications of that are for long-term management. But the work that's been done in Japan is actually seeing that although it's a very dense planting, that naturally develops over time. So you will lose species, but actually you will get certain species develop. And you get a much more even, although it's actually very dense, it's always a mixture of species.
Right.
So you get a development of a more of a woodland straight away.
So if you imagine somewhere like St Just Town Square or the car park, for example,
Yeah.
where you've got a very urban environment, this would be a different way of planting there, where you would allocate, a 10 or 20 metre square, and
A
then
golf course.
and you pack it with trees. You plant perhaps several hundred trees in a very small area,
Yeah.
and so then you get this young woodland growing up, which, as Annie says, eventually there will be 2 or 3 trees which will become mature trees in that. But in those early stages, it looks quite different to a traditional urban planting. But it's very exciting because in those early stages, you get all sorts of other wildlife making use of it. And then eventually you end up with these really healthy trees. So
Can I just come back when you said soil treatment? Do you know, is that chemically treated or is it all natural?
No, it's not. It's all naturally, but it's just actually putting that investment in.
And are they bringing that soil in from people that are soil specialists and generating the land first before they're actually taking care of the trees?
It depends a bit on the
planting
site
the
to a
trees?
certain extent.
Oh, okay.
So actually it is about actually prepping the soil, having a look. So actually doing some soil preparation and soil analysis is actually really quite important in terms of actually your tree planting. So they do that and look at what's appropriate. But it is putting that care in at the early doors.
Yeah.
Introducing mycorrhizal, which are actually really important.
Can you explain what that is?
So mycorrhizae, that's a symbiotic relationship between plants and fungi.
Okay.
So actually, it's beneficial for both. So the fungi benefit from the sugars that produce from the trees, and the trees benefit from the release of nutrients and moisture to a certain extent. So actually, in all our woodlands and our forests, and we're actually recognising that this is an incredibly important part of woodland development, is actually, it's not just about the trees, it's about the mycorrhizae around them. But actually initial tree growth actually can really help, because if you put it into soil that's not had any trees, you don't have those beneficial fungi already in the soils. So if you can, on a virgin site as the car park in St Just, which won't have anything in the soil at all, if you can add something to that, that already gives the trees a bit of a kickstart, and actually they can start developing, and you get a much more natural system growing.
And I would think the density, the height, the shade that's provided is why it wouldn't be affected by dryness or drought.
Yeah.
Right? Because that's
they're
that's
mutually supportive. The
Yeah.
trees.
Absolutely.
How high are the trees we're talking about, though, in order to
Well, when they're
achieve this?
Well, when they're planted, they're really small, as Terry was saying, similar to the whips there. But actually, we've got some photographs of some of the comparisons of tree growth where we've done some trials. And it was really, really hot here in 2022, wasn't it? Had real drought conditions, and it was just planted then. And actually, you can see where the Miyawaki forest has actually done really well, whereas the comparison sites, hardly any trees have grown at all. So actually, that planting that really dense plant, there's mutual shade and support there.
Is that something, Terry, you could be experimenting with here? I mean, would it work? It would work, wouldn't it?
I think it's possibly more appropriate in a completely denuded sort of urban environment, whereas I think the planting here Terry can talk more about.
Oh,
that,
so
we're
it's
expanding
context.
hedges. It's context. It's
Contextual.
really important. Yeah.
So, and actually, that it was the Miyawaki forests were planted as a result for urban planting. So, actually, on despoiled land, we've got plenty of that.
Okay.
So that was the focus, as you say, as opposed to a more natural environment that we've got here.
Yeah.
But again, it's that right tree, right place.
Yeah, your urban roundabouts as you're driving on the A30 into Penzance, those roundabouts, instead of having mown grass in the middle of which there's some yucca plants and some, get rid of those and put them.
I find the one at the end of the A307, the 3071, as you're just going from St. Justin to Penzance, they've done a pretty good. There's one big tree, but it's surrounded by another layer of vegetation, and then you do have the green belt that surrounds it. But
here on the farm, we do with the hedging, we do tend to plant pretty close because we don't have a lot of width because the field needs the space. We do plant fairly close and kind of let nature do its own thing. So some things will thrive and other things will, not so much underneath it. So it's kind of letting nature do its own thing.
I can't remember. Is it 10 years here or is it 15? Bosavern's been 15 years.
It's about 14 years.
14 years, 15. Okay. So were there trees on site, or all of this that's here now has been planted?
Yeah, no, virtually all of it.
Okay.
Hugh and his team planted the first batch of about 1,000 willows around the market garden because he knew that they had to be sheltered.
Right.
And that's fast growing. Willow's fast growing, and a great tree. And then after that, the Kate Beckley developed the community woodland, and she worked with the Nancy Laverne School.
Okay.
And planted a couple of more thousand.
Wow.
And then the tree group took over and I've been planting about 700 a year since then.
And you meet, every Sunday, is it?
Yeah, it's every Sunday from 2 till 4 o'clock.
Right.
Pretty much through the year. We have a break in the summer, but it's pretty much through the year, and we're either planting trees, like this time of year we're planting, and then later on we'll be doing tree care and taking out the weeds immediately around the saplings and putting topping up the mulch. So it's pretty much an all year sort of thing. And we do need volunteers. We do need people coming and going, leaving with work and what have you. And
you need a tree bus. Someone goes through St. Justin, just picks people up, brings them to the farm, do your tree, and then take them back home.
Yeah.
I have to echo what Terry was saying about willow being a fantastic tree, incidentally, because what I love about willow is you can just take a cutting, a pencil, stick it in the ground, and off it goes. So you can create yourself a new hedge with no cost, no effort. Just take some cuttings. Make sure they're the right way up.
Yeah.
If you put them in upside down, they don't work. But apart from that, good to go. Amazing tree.
I've even seen them grow when they've been the wrong way up. I've seen kids do it, and you're looking like you have to redo what they planted, and you're like, and then how's that growing? But it's even worked the wrong way up.
Annie, I just want to come back to you. This has been in the back of my mind throughout the conversation, just so that we're clear on this. If you own your own land, and you've got your own property, whether it's a half acre or whatever, this planning, I still have this idea of planning permission for trees in my head. Can anyone just plant what they want into the ground and then let it do what it does? Or is what you're saying that there are certain things that need to be met in order to do that?
It depends very much on where you are.
Okay.
So you may be in an area which is a protected landscape for one reason or another. So actually some areas, so the Forestry Commission produce sensitivity mapping. So there are some areas where actually any tree planting is appropriate in those areas without any additional kind of checks and balances. There's other areas where ecologically, as Nick was saying, there may be reasons why you wouldn't want to plant trees there, or from a landscape perspective. So it is about where you are to a large extent. And it's not a barrier. It's just actually making sure that what you do is appropriate.
Yeah.
So it might be that it needs to be scaled down or a slightly different management. So it might be not the whole field that you're planting, but it might be, as Terry was sort of saying, actually you kind of plant along the hedgerows or in the corners. So it's about actually looking at where you are and what you can plant to be appropriate in that space.
Right.
I think it's worth mentioning tree preservation orders, or TPOs, at this point. So tree preservation orders are for existing trees that are protected from management, and it's worth people being aware of. Cornwall Council has a fantastic interactive map which you can look at all sorts of things on. I use it very often. So you look on the tree preservation order layer, and it will show you areas of trees which are protected, which you need to get permission for before you manage, and also individual trees, some particularly important, usually for landscape or historical value. Individual trees are mapped on there as well. So if you're managing your woodlands, it's worth checking for.
But you can also put forward certain areas for TPO.
You can, yes.
So
new trees can be.
A tree that you actually really think is valuable for a landscape reason or whatever. Tree planners sometimes don't like that, but you can actually put forward. So it could actually have a preservation order put on that tree that doesn't currently. But in a landscape scale, those trees in many cases are protected for other reasons. So you wouldn't be able to do any management work to them. So in terms of tree planting, you just need to be aware of what's appropriate.
And a benefit to your service, like the willow idea that you brought up, is you could go to a location and say, look, what are you trying to achieve here? Well, I want protection for X. And you'd say, well, that would be these trees. I'm looking for something decorative. Well, that will be these trees. I've got farming animals or whatever, agriculture. I'm looking for these. You'll be looking for those trees.
Absolutely. So definitely willow's fantastic. And it might be you want to have that as initial shelter to shelter the trees that you want.
Is there a charge for your service?
No, we're completely funded. So actually anybody can come to us and actually ask for our advice. It's totally free of cost. Yeah, currently. So, and long may it continue.
That's fantastic.
So, yeah, I mean, it's part of a wider government initiative. So Cornwall was selected as one of only 2 woodland creation partnerships in the country, ourselves and Northumberland. So we're funded to look at different ways of planting trees. So we look at supporting anybody who has aspirations to plant trees and encourage anybody to plant trees.
So on my potential landscapes to plant trees, another one while you were speaking came up, school grounds.
Yep.
So there, I could see, are you involved with that at all?
Yes, so we do. We work with a number of schools to actually do tree planting projects.
Okay.
So actually that they can plant trees in the school, and those are really, really valuable projects because obviously
the
kids involved directly in the planting.
Right.
And I know projects that I've been involved in from 30 years ago even. And actually it's really exciting because actually you'll see people that you go, yeah, I do remember planting trees. So it does have that long-term legacy, if you like. So yeah, schools are great. So often people will see it as potentially a bit of a problem. Oh, flip, I planted the trees and actually what am I going to have to do long-term to manage them and maintain them? So sometimes it's actually also not just about getting the tree planted, it's about the support for how you're going to manage and maintain those long-term, because it may be seen, sometimes they're seen as a liability rather than as an asset.
So you're talking about some like a friction along the way.
Yeah.
So people are, oh, really?
Yeah, so sometimes that is, you have to take that into consideration, because the easy bit very often is putting the tree in the ground. So actually it's about growing that tree. Does it get watered?
Yeah.
Is it swamped by weeds? All those things that Terry's volunteers desperately have to try and do to make sure that trees he's planted are so if you've planted thousands of trees, actually, can you maintain and manage all those trees?
Yeah.
So,
But I'd like to add into the management that trees, timber, wood is a useful resource, and so if you're broad-minded and forward-thinking, you can plant, say, a hedge with the intention that part of your maintenance will be taking material out of the hedge that you can use. So either producing simply, firewood, or you can, if you've got willow, you can use it for basketry. If you're planting fruit trees, you've got something that's a crop that you can harvest. And I think we really underuse woodland in that way. Even if we stack or leave it to rot down, that's a valuable habitat in its own right. So I think part of the management conception is, how is this tree going to be useful, as well as aesthetic and looking at carbon and providing shade and all these other benefits. There are some very practical things that you can plan for. So the willow bed that's been planted here at Bosavern, that is a habitat in its own right, but every year that's a useful resource that can be used for basketry, for example.
One of the things that I find most frustrating is driving along the highway, seeing areas that I've been in. There's been the effort to regrow an area. I see the little tree guards around, but year after year, I just don't see anything popping up or out. And I don't know if they're growing. I don't know if they're dead. I just know that they're not doing anything. And I don't know I don't know what's going on in that situation. And if that's sort of a negative reinforcement about, okay, I'm going to make all this effort and nothing's actually going to transpire.
Yeah, part of the tree care on the farm is that we go around all the previous plantings and see if there's any that are that have not survived,
right,
and replace them.
Yeah.
So that, within every guard there is something going on, and some things take longer to grow than others.
Sure.
Holly takes quite a long time to grow, so you can look inside a guard and see a holly that's 7 or 8 inches and thinking, oh well, it's kind of on its way. But just checking that things, that there is actually a patent sapling that's growing.
Is there a percentage between what lives and what doesn't?
we'd like to look at, there's always some losses. So there's always some loss. So you do have to manage for that. We'd, like to look at sort of 80% survival rates. And sometimes it's better than that. And sometimes if it's not there, we have to look at why. And that might have been the species we planted weren't actually right for that site. And sometimes you do learn. You do kind of go where you think something's going to do really well here, and actually it doesn't. So you have to kind of reflect what's there. And the other thing we touched about is tree guards. So actually an awful lot of resource and an awful lot of headaches go into putting in the guards. So, and I know that, well, when you go along the A30, don't you now, and it's kind of like a wall-to-wall of tree guards, and you can't actually see much in the way of trees at all. And then actually removing those tree guards is a huge piece of work that I know I've done. And then what do you do with it all? Because you've actually produced all this plastic or whatever it's...
Are they reusable?
So the market in terms of reusable or biodegradable is developing.
Okay.
Reusable is hard. If plastics photodegrade, so they become very brittle, so they're not really very reusable. So they can be reused on a small scale, but when you've got one of those vast planting schemes, it's not reusable. The recycled ones, different materials, and I'm sure Terry's experimented with them. So we're experimenting with different ways, but also looking at one of the other things that we need to look at is long-term pest management. So that's a whole issue.
Terry, you had some?
Yes, we experimented with cardboard tree guards, and they were absolutely hopeless.
Once they got wet.
They just disintegrated. Yeah, they had a kind of a light plastic coating. But they disappeared and just went soggy within one season, and we had to replace them all.
We reiterated that, and ours ended up a bit like being a coffin for the trees because they just
Yeah.
sort of collapsed on the trees.
Yeah,
so
that's
actually,
right,
they weren't
yes,
very good
yes.
at all.
But even though you're doing that, is it not better than using plastic that's not as easily? I mean, I know that it's labor intensive.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're finding that the straightforward plastic guards, you can reuse them.
Okay.
So they're lasting. And so after 3-4 years, we can take them off of the existing trees, which are, surviving fine.
They last that long. 4 years in sunlight and rain and wind.
And then we use them again, and they'll last another 4 or 5 years, and maybe again.
And are they connected with wires or string, or or do they just slot straight over?
Oh well, you can slice down them and take them off of the larger saplings that have grown.
Okay.
And then the round ones they will reform themselves without needing to be attached with anything else. So they are very reusable. Yes.
And there's a recycling scheme going on. So the Grower, which is one of the nurseries we use, and a local one in Cornwall. Tubiflex is a company, so they will actually look at if people are taking all their tree guards off. They're looking at collection, so that actually that material can now be recycled.
Okay.
So it's trial, and they've just started that this year. So it'd be encouraging to see how that's working, particularly as we're obviously into sort of second, third years of our planting for Forest for Cornwall. That actually any tree guards are resulting.
And they're guarding against.
Well, they're wind shelter, but particularly it's rabbits.
Okay.
They're sunk a little bit into the ground, so that helps keep mice and voles at bay, because they love to nibble at the young roots.
I think you are right, though, to question the success of some of those tree planting schemes, because I have the same feeling. I can't speak for all of them, but I do feel that in some cases there is a initial environmental impact assessment which says once this project has been completed, you must plant this number of trees, and so those regimented rows of plastic tubes appear, and I don't know how much aftercare they always receive. I don't know how appropriate the trees are for the environment they're being planted in, whether they've got soil and mycorrhizal fungi in the environment to flourish. And so it might be that it's the thing that we do in those situations, and we could change that by questioning it. So I think it is right to question the success of that.
I think for me that comes from, I used to live in BC, in Canada, British Columbia, and lots of clear cutting. And one of the offsets of clear cutting is that companies will promise to go in and they go on an industrial level, send out tree planters, and they poke the hole, put the seedling in, and leave and go. And I think one of the things, I haven't been back to BC in a while, but I think one of the things was that success rate of how much was growing. But in the wild, I don't know if it's very different than here, which is not as wild. You can still see what's going on quite easily here, whereas to fly in a helicopter and go up really into a remote area and find out what's going on is a very cost inefficient at times.
And the incentive just to plant trees means that actually, as Nick was saying, you get inappropriate planting, and actually the survival rates are not good, and nobody's managing it. Interestingly, when they did some research on that, actually they found that the trees planted by volunteers very often have the best survival rates. So claps hands for volunteer planting. But obviously, in terms of the amount of tree planting that we want to achieve, then we can't just rely on volunteers.
But that's Terry's aftercare. That sounds like you're coming in the TLC. What does that stand for again? Tree loving care?
Yeah, tree loving care. TLC. Yeah, it's a very important part. We're experimenting this year with not using guards, because the area we're planting is actually, it's got deer and rabbit-proof fencing around.
Okay.
So we're able to plant without guards, and I feel a little bit nervous. I feel a bit vulnerable. They may be a little bit vulnerable, but I think they'll be fine. We plant a cane right next to them, and just lightly tie them to the cane, so that gives them some wind protection. But it also tells us where the plants are when the grasses around them and the weeds grow a little bit, so that we don't brush cut them by mistake.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
You can also experiment with planting particularly spiky shrubs around areas of tree planting and using blackthorn and hawthorn as a natural barrier. That's particularly effective.
We're using a lot of gorse this year, which is very native to the area, and hawthorn. Yeah.
Just as we're rounding off, then, Annie, would you like to speak on sort of pest and disease or anything that's coming into that you're seeing that's impacting the planting process?
We do have to be mindful. So we've got a number of diseases come in which have devastated our native trees. So ash dieback is one. It's impacted recently. Dutch elm disease came in and an awful lot of trees removed. So we do have to think about what do we have in our landscapes that actually can help start replace those.
Where are they coming from?
We've had diseases come in from Europe to a certain extent. So
Okay.
actually, and they have devastated tree population. So it's actually had a really significant impact on our landscape. The other ones that we need to look at is for our tree planting programs, squirrels and deer. We obviously talked about tree protection, so you can protect against deer to a certain extent. Grey squirrels will be a significant issue coming on. They like trees that are about sort of 10, 12 year old. They'll remove the bark.
Those are the American ones, aren't they?
Yes. So we are looking at some programs where we do squirrel management. So working with landholders to have a cohort of people to manage. But deer is a very controversial one that actually we've got a significant increase in deer populations because they don't have any natural predators. Mm-hmm. So actually management of deer will be an issue coming forward. It's great meat if you're a meat eater. So venison is great, but we don't have a market for venison in this area. So there's another whole issue that we could discuss there. But yeah, so those are things that we have to think about that actually, in terms of actually we're planting all these trees, actually how do we make sure they survive long term? We actually have to think about other management issues as well.
What's sort of the average time from, again, idea to trees in ground that you see if somebody wanted to get a project off? Are we talking months? Are we talking years? Or?
Well, we've just approved a couple of projects, small scale projects that we hope will actually be delivered this planting season, which is really until March. Mm-hmm. But actually for a lot of the bigger schemes, it can take 2 years in the development from actual development ideas.
And is bigger scheme a Bosavern example?
Bosavern's would be a small scale scheme because
small
basically
scale.
Once they came, Terry and his team have done all the work in terms of thinking. We provide that support and the grants. And then it's the hard work for Terry and his team to actually get them in the ground and look after them.
I'd just like to add, coming back to Bosavern, it's well worth coming into the car park, and on your way down to the shop, there's a lovely board with the nature trail marks onto it. We have got plans to improve the trail, but it's well worth coming in, having a look at that trail and having a walk around the site to see some of the things we've been talking about, particularly going up to the secret glade, Terry.
So looking a year ahead, if I ask each of you what would be your plan, what would you like to see within your own respective organizations and duties you're carrying out? I'll start with you, Nick, on this one to finish off.
I love when people increase their knowledge and awareness and understanding through contact with nature. So I think that the thing that I would like to do, and I spend a lot of my time doing, and I would encourage others to do, is just to get out there and learn to identify trees, learn to identify the individual species, watch them through the seasons, watch what species are associating with the trees in your particular area. Give scrub a thumbs up, start to appreciate the stuff that's using scrub. Watch the scrub over the years turn into woodland, and then watch the trees fall down and turn back into scrub, that wonderful cycle.
You need a t-shirt, give scrub a chance. And I guess some of what you're saying, or a good portion of what you're saying, is going to be part of the nature trail that you're offering, right?
That's what I'm hoping, is that people will walk around the. I'm singing the praises of the woodland area, and I'm hoping that the walk to the woodland area will be as interesting, because there will be the food production that people can see. There'll be the Cornish hedges, the scrub. There's going to be meadows for people to look at, and then the lovely woodland
Yeah.
up in the community woodland as well.
Coming from an art background, just to add, maybe a way of slowing things down in your group is to offer either some people write, some people draw, some people paint, but writing or drawing, in my past when I was studying, slowed everything down to a point that you're really studying and reacting. So rather than just walking through or as part of the walk, if there'd be something that they could do as an activity, maybe this has been thought through or not, I'm not sure, but to just really concentrate on an area and to sort of sketch that out or write their emotions that they feel in that moment about or whatever, so that they harness or tap into that in the moment, and that really sticks.
Yeah, we totally need you. We're scientists, and we think in terms of kind of academic papers and field guides, which are sometimes dull.
Yeah.
So what we need is people who appreciate and share and can communicate in an artistic way.
I used to work at a camp. We used to take the kids on a hike, and if they found dried up poop, whether it's rabbit or deer or whatever, because it was dried up, they would break it open and they would start to actually look at what was eaten or, what they could see or investigate from that animal. And it was really, obviously washed their hands and everything afterwards, but that was really interesting for them to get into that and play with poop. 8 to 13-year-olds.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember doing that with kids, and I remember doing that. It's just wildly exciting. Yeah,
and they don't forget that.
No.
Like, we went somewhere, we played with poop. Like,
And it's that experience, isn't it? Because actually it needs to be hands-on, because if you kind of read about it or it's just on the TV or something else, it's alien. But actually it's that real direct experience that I think is so valuable. And in fact, so valuable are things like the nature trail that actually people actually get to and tree planting, people actually experience it. You get your hands dirty.
Yeah.
You actually go and sit in some trees. You actually go and lie on your back and look at the sky. It's those sort of things that actually make that difference and actually connect you.
And summer here is so beautiful. It's just, if you're worried about mosquitoes, they don't exist. Being Canadian. Annie, what would you like in the year ahead?
I suppose the key is long-term funding for us so that we can carry on doing what we're doing. So that's dependent on much wider factors. I think the most exciting thing is for us is that when people have started on a small-scale project and then they come back and they want to do another one. So actually it's almost like, we've got it now. What's the next thing we can do? Mm-hmm. But also a legacy of actually leaving some training and some skills, so that actually we've started this process and other people can take it on, and it's your journey now.
Right. Okay, great. Terry.
Yeah, well...
The farm.
Yeah, well, this coming winter we'll be planting on the Sundays. We've got 500 trees just been delivered from the grower, funded by Forest for Cornwall. We've got 200 or 300 trees that we've grown ourselves from seeds.
Oh, wow.
So we'll be adding them in. We'll be coppicing the willow patch and planting some of those. And then as we get to spring, the seeds that are in dormancy that we've collected, actually, they've been in the top of my fridge for the last few weeks. They'll be starting to germinate, so we'll be potting them up and growing them on to be planted for the following autumn. Mm-hmm. I'd like to see more involvement from local people. We've got a good connection with the schools, so it'd be nice to continue having the pupils really learn about nature. And particularly to understand that we are nature. It's not that we are separate and nature is something we do things to. Mm-hmm. We are actually nature. We breathe the trees and the trees breathe us. And to get more local people involved and to enjoy what is a really kind of wholesome, grounded, joyous experience.
Sure. And if anyone listening wants to get in contact with you about anything, Annie, I'll start with yourself. Where would they find the details for you?
Forest for Cornwall, the website, check it out, put in an inquiry in, and one of our team will get back to you.
And you're looking for volunteers as well?
We do work, we usually signpost volunteers. Okay. So we we do some management with volunteers, but we tend to signpost them to local projects.
Okay.
So somebody in this area, we'd say, have you tried out Bosavern Farm?
All right. Okay. Terry, anything? How do people get in contact if they want to do anything
yeah,
here?
the Bosavern Farm website, and there's a section for volunteers, and yeah, they can have a look at that. And my email's there, so anybody wanting to know more can contact me
Okay.
or contact the farm.
And Nick, do you need any help on the nature trail?
I think follow Terry's instructions for contact. So yeah, come to the farm. Get in touch with Bosavern.
Okay, great. Well, wonderful having you all here. It's been a really great conversation. I've really enjoyed myself. I hope you have.
Yes, indeed.
That's great.
It's been good.
I think I'm going to be driving around now looking, trees can go there.
Is it the right place?
Yeah. What's the thing? Tree. What's your motto? Tree.
Right tree, right
Right
place.
tree, right place, and shrubs.
Oh, what was it?
Shrubs for all? Shrubs for
What did
us?
I say? That sounds like Toys R Us.
I know, that's
Give
what I
shrubs a chance.
Give shrubs a chance.
Yeah.
Scrub.
Scrubs.
Give scrub a
Scrubs.
chance.
Give scrubs a chance. All right. Well, thank you very much, all, and glad to have you here.
Thank you. It's been great.